فأهل الوفاء كلون السحاب وحسن الربيع وماء المطر. أحب الوفاء
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم سيدنا محمد وآله وأصحابه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. All praise due to Allah, the Lord, Cherisher, Nourisher, Sustainer and Master of the universe, the most gracious, the most beneficent, the most merciful. Ya Allah, it is only you that we worship and it is your guidance that we seek. Ya Allah, keep us on the straight path. Ya Allah, show us with your choice of blessings. Ya Allah, show us with your mercy. Ya Allah, guide us. Greetings, salams, salutations on our beloved Nabi Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's now 8 minutes past 9 on this beautiful Friday evening, the 11th of October 2024, the 8th of Rabiul Thani 1446. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Let's Chat on Radio Al Ansar with myself, Faizal MJ Suleman. Yes, it is undoubtedly an absolutely beautiful evening here in Durban. It's nice and warm out there. And of course, we're always thankful to the Almighty for all of the favors that He bestows upon us. Tonight, we will be discussing two topics. The first half of the show, we will be talking about breaking the silence and addressing emotional and physical abuse of husbands. And in the second part of the show, we will be talking about the devastating impact on children without education in Gaza. Our very first guest is Nesli Parker. And we say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and welcome to Let's Chat and thank you for joining me on the program this evening.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and jazakallah for having me, Faisal. I hope you are well on that side.
Alhamdulillah, all good. Uh, Alhamdulillah, all good. And you know, it's an honor hosting you this evening. Now, just to uh, introduce our guest, Nesli Parker is a social development therapist, Dr. Sigma from Sigma Healing Practice, based in Cape Town. The focus of her work is the continuous study of human development, examining the influences, thoughts, actions, and behaviors of individuals in society. She helps to facilitate and educate people to effectively face issues surrounding their relationships and mental health challenges such as trauma, abuse, marital problems, mental health challenges. And through her counseling service, Nasli Parker uplifts and teaches victims of narcissist abuse as well as individuals who suffer from mental health challenges how to overcome their mental struggles, hampering them from leading normal lives. She has 20 years of experience in this chosen profession and is very passionate and committed to it. Now, Nestle, can you define emotional and physical abuse and explain how they manifest in relationships?
I think we must understand abuse of any kind, Faisal. It leads to extreme living conditions for any human being. When people that are in environments such as those, when they are being, abused or prone to having verbally abused, being a verbally abused situations, it's very difficult for them to cope in such an environment. And
Mhm,
abuse itself is to denigrate another person, whether it is a man or a woman or even a child. It is basically to strip a human being of their dignity and their rights to live in safety and peace. And nobody wants to be in an environment where they don't feel safe or at peace, where they're not able to function. So it's happening quite rife. It's quite rife in society today, and especially where males are concerned. And I'm glad that we're doing this evening because this is a topic that really needs to be addressed and spoken about.
mhm. Now, normally, males will not accept or will not even mention that they are being abused, as because of the stigma, etc. And as we have this perception that it's only females that are being abused, yet the situation is otherwise. Now, why do you think this issue remains largely hidden, especially when it comes to male victims?
I think it's the stereotypical belief that abuse is a single gendered crime and it only relates to women and children. And most men fall under the banner of belief that coming forward or speaking out about being victims of abuse it deems them as being weak because
Mhm.
the role of masculine gender belongs to the male. And for a male to be abused by a female who is seen as the weaker sex is degrading. And here's the thing, many males don't view themselves as being human first, it's gender first, meaning the expectation of what a man must be, and their emotions are then blocked off. So they tend to comply and accept the abuse, but develop feelings of resentment and vengeance towards their spouse for what's happening to them. So it's really a
Mhm.
no-win situation in regards to keeping silent about it. And many men choose to remain complacent in accepting that behavior and cause more harm to themselves by exploring, destructive vices outside of the marriage to have the emotional needs met. So rather than dealing with the problem by seeking professional help, which they really need to do.
Now, what societal attitudes contribute to the stigma surrounding men as victims of abuse?
It's very common in for society to be judgmental, Faisal, and especially
Mhm.
when it comes to men and the role of men, which is very, it's very rife these days on social media, where men are, besides women being degraded, men are being degraded just as much. So that sort of, gives men the impression, that, for them to step up and speak about being abused or suffering from abuse is going to make them look and perceive them as being weak or failures or not masculine enough. So it makes it very hard for them to speak out because society is not very supportive of men that are going through that type of abuse, whether it be verbal, emotional, or physical even. So it's a very difficult situation for a male to be in because, like I mentioned, it's for a male, it's their belief is more that it's not always males that suffer from abuse, it's more females. So for a male to have that belief that if he's going through an abusive situation, for him to speak out, he's going to be regarded by society as being a weak person or a failure. It's a very tough thing to live with, and it's important for them to seek a different way of thinking and a different way of perceiving things in regards to trying to get help and trying to help themselves as well.
And can you share some statistics or research findings that illustrate the prevalence of abuse against men?
There's a lot of research being done right now. I mean, currently, the statistics when it comes to the males versus females in regards to abuse has risen quite a lot. And at the end of the day, Faisal, it's a very common thing, unfortunately, that's happening in society today, and it's not something that is readily admitted by the males themselves. So, what they do in the face of that suffering is to try and reduce it and minimize their feelings and their thoughts about it by pretending that it's not true. And, once you silent about abuse, then nothing can really be done about it unless you speak out. So, it's difficult for them to admit that they are being, controlled or being abused by another person, namely their spouse
Mhm.
or the mother of children or their wife or partner. It's like speaking out about somebody that you feel you're betraying in some way. So the highlight of this perceived sense of failure for men needs to change, because by speaking out you're not failing as a man, you're actually stepping up as a man, and being an example for future generations. So society shouldn't even factor in that at all.
Mhm. We are discussing breaking the silence and addressing emotional and psychological abuse of husbands. Our guest this evening is Nasli Parker, a social development therapist. And if you have any questions or any contributions to this particular topic, you may forward them to us via WhatsApp on 060 904 1056. 060 904 1056. And the topic for discussion is breaking the silence, addressing emotional and physical abuse of husbands. Now, Nestle, what are some subtle signs of emotional abuse that might be overlooked?
Depression mostly and anxiety are some of the main signs. A lot of it also involves sadness, disappointment, anger, frustration, and most of all, a lot of resentment. They feel a lot of negative emotions simultaneously, which is paralyzing to cope with on a daily basis. And it does become apparent in them seeking out destructive outlets such as obesity, turning to drugs, unhealthy hygiene practices. Some people have even turned to porn or having an affair. But overall, the most damaging, I think, is the continuous cycle of accepting the abuse by being silent.
Hmm. Always, unfortunately, denial plays a huge part, and which always causes it, unfortunately, across the board. Now, how can physical abuse be identified, especially in cases where it may not be overt?
Physical abuse, I mean, like with women as well, Faisal.
Hmm.
There's a lot of shame involved in abuse, right? A
Hmm.
lot of victims of abuse live with shame and humiliation, so what they do is they tend to cover it up. And especially with physical abuse, it's more apparent because it's visible. It's not something that you could really hide that well. But I think the most telltale signs would be, the withdrawal of the person themselves. If you know somebody to be a specific way, you've known them all these years, and you know their character and their personality, and all of a sudden it's changed and they've become more withdrawn. It's basically, abuse is an overall breakdown of what makes up a human being, and what makes somebody feel human. So it's being stripped of your identity, your dignity, and your rights. And if you are close to somebody that is going through abuse, it's pretty easy to spot. Regardless of the physical appearance, you would be able to tell that this person is going through something that needs to be addressed.
Hmm. And what are some behavioral changes friends and family should watch for in someone who may be experiencing abuse?
I think change in appearance, like I mentioned, change in personality, sudden withdrawal. If that person is no longer, present, I think that's the most important thing, because
Hmm.
what happens with people that are in abuse, they tend to withdraw and isolate themselves and not really want to engage with family and friends, and they tend to isolate themselves and remain away from public view, as if they are hiding. So if, like I mentioned, if you are close to somebody, and you are friends with somebody that you've known, that's always been an outgoing person, that's always been a social person, and all of a sudden this person is now changed, you need to make a point of involving yourself. Because the thing is, Faisal, a lot of people feel the need not to involve themselves, and it's
Hmm.
not my business, it's not my problem. And that attitude needs to change. It really does. Because especially as Muslims, we need to be there for one another. I mean, it's important, as much as it's important for you to have food in your house, it's important for your neighbor to have food in their house as well. So it's your moral
Absolutely.
um, to make sure that your friend or your family member is okay. And you can start off by trying to communicate with them. And like I mentioned, there are telltale signs. So if you pick up on these telltale signs, and it becomes a consistent thing, then you need to make it your business to address it, because that person may need help.
Hmm. No, absolutely. And I think family plays family, friends, etc. play a huge role because I think they are in the best position to make out any
Yeah,
changes in behavior patterns, etc. Because they know you
absolutely.
well. Hmm.
Yes.
Now, Nestle, what are the short and long-term effects of emotional and physical abuse on men?
The long-term effects depends on how quickly it's addressed, Faisal. Because you
Hmm.
see, the thing, in order to break the chain of emotional abuse, one has to step up and speak out. If you are going to be complacent and not be silent about it, which is what the abuser wants at the end of the day. Any abuser wants their victim to be silent, because that is a form of control that they have over the victim. So when the victim now speaks out and starts exposing the abuser, it's all the better for the victim, because now it's a pathway to freedom, it's a pathway to escaping that torturous life. So the first step would be to speak out, to find the resources, to seek help, because there are resources out there. There is help out there. And if it's not with family, then you don't have to go in that direction. There are strangers that are out there that are doing wonderful work in regards to helping victims of abuse. So, approach any one of them. It doesn't necessarily have to be family. It doesn't necessarily have to be the people that because most of the time, unfortunately, Faisal, especially with men, also they're not always believed um, in
Mhm.
regards to being abused, and that's also one of the reasons why they don't necessarily speak out, because it's hard for people to believe that this is what's happening, because the betrayal of the marriage or the family dynamic is so perfect in the eyes of the public that it's not easily or readily believed that this person may be suffering behind the scenes. So
Mhm.
it's very difficult for a victim of abuse to step forward, but it's not impossible for them to step forward, because I think once they speak out, that is a step in the right direction in regards to changing these extreme conditions that they're living in, whereby they will get the help that they need.
Let's look at a man's self-esteem, his mental health, and overall well-being. How does abuse affect all of these?
Well, if somebody, especially somebody that you love, and somebody that you've been committed to in marriage, if that person dismisses your right to expression, your thoughts, your feelings, when they are verbally degrading you and undermining you and disrespecting your right to vocalize what you feel is right and what you feel is wrong, when they intentionally reject your moral virtues and manipulate you into going against yourself and your beliefs, there is no love in such a marriage. There's no peace in such a marriage. There's actually no equal rights. What's happening then is this is just subjugation and servitude and exhaustion, and the feeling of being suffocated all the time. And nobody wants to live like that at the end of the day.
Let's look at the effect of abuse on a man's future relationships. Uh, how does how can abuse influence a man's ability to form healthy future relationships?
The same way it would for a female, because what's happening is now the person that is abusing you is breaking your identity, is breaking you down in every sense, because that is the point of the abuse, to
Mhm.
completely integrate you to the point where you don't have a sense of self anymore. So if you don't have a sense of self and a sense of worthiness, then how are you then going to apply yourself in trying to forge relationships or healthy connections with someone else if you are not feeling functional or healthy within yourself mentally and emotionally? It's not possible for you to do that. So this is why I say that a lot of victims of abuse choose to stay in the situations that they're in, because they have that belief that there is nothing more for them out there, because of the destruction that is already been done to themselves by the abuser. Um, and the point of therapy is to change that mindset into the belief that there are possibilities of living a healthy, fulfilled life. But it needs that person to take the step in that direction towards healing.
Mhm. There's a question that's come through from one of the listeners. Assalamu alaikum to the panel. Wa alaikum salam. Just a general question. What is the standard recommendation that South Africa suggests as treatment for people that have suffered emotional abuse, especially male victims?
Okay, so I can't speak for the South African government because I have my thoughts on them, and I'm not going to really view that right now, Faisal, because that's a
Hmm.
discussion for another day. But
Okay.
from my knowledge, the legal system has placed structures for victims of abuse, and this is, it's not gender specific. They have a right to lay a charge, they obtain a protection order and ensure that their rights are enforced by SAPS, because SAPS, that is what SAPS is supposed to do, South African police. They are supposed to follow through with these procedures. And then, of course, the Department of Social Development deals with gender based violence. They have a 24/7 day call center facility available, because everybody, I mean, according to the law of South Africa, everybody has the right to live in freedom and safety. And with the history that this country has had in regards to discrimination, its stance on abuse is very, very serious. So I would think that there are many resources that government has placed in regards to helping victims of abuse. How constructive and how consistent they are, I cannot tell you. I can only speak for myself and the victims and the people that I have dealt with personally in terms of helping them on their roads to recovery. But what I can say is it's not just me. There are many other people out there as well that are very committed to helping people that have gone through abusive relationships. But also, I'd like to add that I am in the process of constructing an institution, inshallah, Amin, with Allah's blessing. I would like to forward that in regards to helping the community, and put up structures so that people that are going through abusive marriages or abusive relationships have a place that they can come to for help and for to basically heal.
Mhm. Let's look at seeking help. What initial steps should a man take if he realizes he's in an abusive situation?
I think the first step would be like to enlist the help of your friends and your family and your closest support system, if that is your closest support system. If not, then like I mentioned before, there are facilities and institutions that are actively working with victims of abuse. And especially for men, it's important that you gather evidence, and the most crucial step to overcoming this is to speak out, of course, and don't hide what is being done to you. If you do, then you are complicit in your own suffering and that of your children, if you have children, um, in this marriage. So I think the first step would be to gain support, formulate a support system, people that you can trust, people that know you, people that will listen to you, people that will actively help you. Don't waste your time approaching family members, friends that are going to make fun of you or degrade you even further, because that's like having secondary trauma over again.
Okay, there's a message from Bibi Aisha Lahir, one of our prominent presenters. Some women who earn more than their husband constantly emasculate them to the point where a man would contemplate suicide because he may feel like he has failed as a man in the way society perceives a man to be. Men need to break the silence and cycle of abuse. There is help out there. Please do not suffer in silence. And Bibi Aisha Lahir. Bibi Aisha, Jazakallah khair for that contribution to that topic. Uh, Leslie, coming back to our discussion, uh, are there specific resources or organizations tailored to support male victims of abuse?
Yes, like I mentioned, I'm one of them. Alhamdulillah, Allah has given me this calling in regards to working with victims of abuse, and as well as people that I am connected to. So it's there is resources out there.
Mhm.
Government has provided resources in regards to gender-based violence, and yeah, there are a
Mhm.
lot of resources out there that one can approach. It's just a matter of speaking up and finding these resources, which are very readily available to victims of abuse.
Now, if I know of somebody that is suffering, from gender-based violence, somebody that is being abused, how can I approach a friend or a loved one who may be experiencing abuse without making them feel uncomfortable?
I think the first step would be compassion. People that are going
Mhm.
through abuse, Faisal, they've lost all sense of self. So the first step in trying to help somebody to open up would be, a compassionate approach and a sensitive approach, because it
Mhm.
is a very sensitive situation. And once that person feels safe enough to express themselves, I think that is the first step towards that person actually healing, because a lot of victims tend to sort of bottle up everything inside, especially men aren't prone to admitting things, especially like abuse. They're very reluctant to express their emotions. So it's important to approach someone like that if you feel that that person is being abused or that person is going through emotional turmoil. It's very important to approach that with a lot of sensitivity and a lot of it's sort of like wearing kid gloves, and look at that person not as a male
Mhm.
or a female. Look at that person as a human being, and approach it in that sense. Because once you look at that person as a human being, automatically you would be able to be empathetic and understanding and accommodating. So it's very important to approach that with compassion.
Uh, Now, what strategies can we employ to encourage men to share their experiences? And I'll just go one step further. How can family and friends create a safe place for discussion around this topic? Let's deal with both together.
Well, if you are genuinely concerned about a family member, I think it would be very easy to, gather the rest of the family together, have a discussion, without any judgment, without any opinions, because that's literally the last thing that that person would need. What that person would need is to be heard. So it's not a matter of you being opinionated, and giving your ideas and perceptions on what you think the problem is. Rather, have a listening ear, create an environment of safety, so that that person is able to express themselves freely. And like I mentioned, be compassionate and be sensitive to what they're saying. Really listen to them, because victims of abuse, the first thing that they would speak out about really is the fact that they're not heard, the fact that nobody believes them, the fact that they are unable to express themselves. And that
Mhm.
is mostly the case in the abusive marriages. They're not able to express themselves at all because they're being controlled all the time. So if they are now seeking help from their family or friends, and they are being placed in a situation where they are again being controlled in regards to what they say and how they're expressing themselves, and that's not really helpful, is it? So
Mhm.
instead of trying to damage that person further, educate yourself on how to approach a situation like that if it is happening in your family, or in your friendships. Educate yourself and offer your support in any which way that you can, and make sure that it's consistent, and make sure that your presence is always felt by that person, because they need that. It's the worst thing for somebody that is going through abuse, especially males, is to feel alone, and
Mhm.
isolated. So your presence being in that person's life, and checking up on them, and slowly coaxing them out of that way of feeling and thinking is helpful to them. It sets them up to a path of healing.
Now, obviously, community awareness plays a huge role in breaking the cycle of silence. What role would you say community awareness plays?
I think what we're doing right now is very important, Faisal. By
Mhm.
speaking about this, it plays a huge role, because we are at this point in time extending a hand of help, by speaking about it, so that people feel that this is a reality, this is something that is happening on a daily basis, for people out there, and that it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's
Mhm.
nothing to feel that you need to run away and hide. It's actually better for you to step forward and speak out, because you could be saving another person's life by speaking up about your experience. So this program right now is an extension, and a extension and a hand of help to people, in regards to stepping forward and seeking that help and that support.
Let's talk about therapy and recovery. What therapeutic approaches do you find most effective for men recovering from abuse?
I think the best therapy is, honesty, to be
Mhm.
honest, to be able to admit that this is happening, because at the end of the day, when you admitting to something, you are acknowledging it for what it is instead of running away from it. You're not dismissing it. So it plays a huge role, therapy, because that also creates a safe space and environment for somebody to be able to freely express themselves. And once they can admit and be honest with themselves that, this situation that they've been in, or this experience that they've had in regards to abuse, has caused them a lot of, discord, emotionally, mentally, and physically, and they really need help to get out of it. It's important to have the right fit in regards to therapists. And I've said this before. It's actually very important, because the person that's on the other end needs to be able to, help you in the ways that you need help, not just sit there and listen to what you're saying, but actually actively help you to get you on that path of healing. And the recovery is a very long one. So realistically, we need to understand that it's not a short-term fix, going to therapy. It's a long-term investment, but it's an investment for yourself in regards to how much you need to heal, and how long that's going to take you. So with me specifically, how I work is I work at the pace of the patient. I don't sort of bombard them with my ideas of what they should do or how they should do it. It's basically, according to how that person is able to do it, because a lot of people have been withdrawn for such a long time in their lives, couples that have been married for many many years, that have gone through abuse, and they've never ever spoken out about it, and when they finally do, it's not an easy thing. So, for them to just automatically change their mindset is not something that is, realistically possible. It takes a long time, and it takes a lot of intensive therapy. And therapy is very helpful in the sense where it allows you to express yourself freely without feeling afraid. There's no fear involved, and it's very important to have the right fit in regards to the therapist that you choose for yourself.
Okay, I've got a message come through on my private WhatsApp. It says, um, can you ask your guests to speak about how a man should be assertive to stand up against his abusive wife?
It depends on the abusive wife, because, if you're speaking about abuse could mean an array of things. It could be verbal, it could be emotional, it could also be physical. So I will touch on the experiences that I've had in regards to males that I have counseled. One specifically went through a lot of physical abuse and a lot of verbal abuse, and it was very difficult to stand up to the abuser, because what would happen is she would always threaten in regards to the children, and because the the father had this close bond with his children, he would then allow her to do whatever she wanted to do to protect his children. So it's would be easy to say, okay, be assertive in regards to standing up to that person, but then sometimes the casualties are the children. So you've got to also be logical in how you approach this type of thing, because there are different degrees of abuse. We're not just speaking about the emotional abuse, whereby there's no physical affliction at all. But if you are being emotionally abused, for instance, then of course be assertive in regards to speaking out, because the most important thing that we need to understand when it comes to abuse is exposing the abuser. And you don't have to physically expose, you don't have to be physical in regards to exposing the abuser where you've got to, attack them physically. You can expose the abuser by speaking out. And that is enough to damage them. That is enough to stop them. So in regards to assertiveness in that regard, I would say that, speaking up and speaking out and exposing the abuser for what they are doing is the best course of action.
Unfortunately, Najdi Paka, we're running out of time, but I will just conclude by asking how can individuals and communities take actionable steps to support men who may be suffering in silence? And also, maybe there are some resources that you may be able to recommend for those wanting to learn more about this topic of seeking support.
I think it's important for society to understand, Faisal, that ignorance is not something that we just really accept. We should educate ourselves on abuse. We should educate ourselves on the necessary things, so that we are able to help one another. And for males specifically, I deal with a lot of victims of abuse, and most of them are males. So I'm one resource. And then, of course, I do refer people to different institutions that I work with. That I will give that information as well to the radio station for those that are interested in seeking that help in regard to that. But I think most importantly, like I mentioned again, to be honest, and speak out about what's happening to you. Because if you're going to be silent, then you're not really helping yourself, and you're not really helping the community or society at all by remaining silent, in regards to what's wrong and what's happening. Because if you're going to keep on remaining silent, you're just going to be creating a tortured society. Your children are going to grow up in that environment, and they're going to, sort of gravitate towards that behavior. And that's not a good thing for anybody. So the first step to actually healing, and the first step to stopping this, is for society to change their mindset and become more involved in regards to stopping this sort of scourge in our communities.
Leslie, I want to thank you for joining me on the program this evening. As it's unfortunately that's all we have time for. There's so much more that one could discuss on this, but I'm sure we'll have another show with this particular topic because it is something that is important, something that needs to be addressed. And as you said, we need to create awareness as well. But Leslie, very quickly in a minute or so, do you have a message for our listeners?
Yes, I do. It's I'd like to mention that I'm doing support groups as well, Faisal. I'm based in
Mhm.
Cape Town, so anyone that is in the Cape Town area is welcome to contact me on my number, which is 081 3466 175, and that is specifically for victims of abuse and those that are currently going through abusive relationships. You are welcome to contact me in regards to joining these group sessions, and it is open to everybody. Seats are limited, unfortunately, so I do have an intake every week, but that can be discussed via, contacting me for more information in regards to that, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair for joining the program, Leslie Parker, and inshallah we will talk to you again. Enjoy the weekend. All the best to you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah for having me, Faisal. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
We spoke to Nasli Parker, a social development therapist, and she spoke to us about breaking the silence, addressing emotional and physical abuse of husbands. And we're going to be taking a short ad break. And on the other side of this, we are going to be speaking to Tasneem Kola, the Secretary General of Education for Humanity, and she'll be talking to us about the devastating impact on children without education in Gaza. Do stay with us.
Severe economic decline make the humanitarian crisis in Yemen the worst in the world. More than 20 million Yemenis do not know where their next meal is coming from, and over 10 million are suffering extreme levels of hunger. With your support, the Al Imdad Foundation delivers essential food aid to starving Yemeni communities. It's a question of survival. So let's do what's right. Donate online at alimdad.com or call 0861 786 243 for more information.
Spring into spring with these great deals from Bawa Superstore. Get these kitchen appliances at unbelievable prices. Defy manual microwave 20 litre at 899. Condia 6 litre air fryer at 599. Condia electric kettle only 80 rand. Get the latest Nadia Corner 4-piece lounge set at 14,999. We have a massive markdown on our beds, mattresses from CD, Restauronic, Cloud9 and Rest Assured. We promise we're the cheapest, and if not, we will meet or match the price of any reputable dealer in town. Only at Bawa Superstore.
Bawa's, where shopping is fun, and you are number one.
Radio Al Ansar, Durban, South Africa.
أحب الوفاء بشتى الصور، أحب الوفي الأمين الأغر، فأهل الوفاء كلون السحاب وحسن الربيع وماء المطر. أحب الوفاء بشتى الصور.
You're listening to Let's Chat on Radio Al Ansar with myself, Faizal MJ Suleman. We now turn our attention to a heartbreaking reality, the devastating impact on children in Gaza who are growing up without access to education. As the conflict continues, schools have been destroyed and thousands of young lives are being robbed of the basic right to learn. Education is more than just books and classrooms. It's a lifeline, a way for children to build a future, to heal from trauma, and to break the cycle of poverty. But for many children in Gaza, that future is slipping away. We say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to Tasneem Kola, who is the Secretary General of Educators for Humanity and an educator at Parks Primary School in Malaysia. Tasneem, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and Jazakallah khair for joining me on the program this evening.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's only our pleasure.
Just to introduce our guest, as I said, Tasneem Kola is the Secretary General of Educators for Humanity and an educator at Park Primary School in Indonesia. With a deep commitment to social justice, Tasneem advocates passionately for the rights of people of Palestine, with a particular focus on the welfare and education of children in the region. Through her roles in education and activism, she strives to raise the awareness and inspire action for those in need, believing that every child deserves a chance at a brighter future. The work of the team at Educators for Humanity reflects their dedication to creating a more equitable world for all. Now, Tasneem, can you provide us with a brief overview of the current situation in Gaza, particularly in terms of how the conflict has impacted children's access to education?
So, the conflict in Gaza has had a devastating impact on children's access to education. Thousands of schools and educational institutions have been destroyed or severely damaged due to the airstrikes and relentless bombings. We see this often on social media platforms. The systemic destruction is part of what scholars call scholasticide, which is the deliberate targeting of educational infrastructure. And with no safe spaces to learn, over about 650,000 children are out of school. Many families are resorting to makeshift tents or online learning, despite frequent electricity and internet outages. This disruption is essentially robbing an entire generation of their rights to learn and grow.
And what are some of the immediate and long term effects of interrupted education on children in conflict zones like Gaza?
In the short term, children experience a profound sense of loss, losing not only their physical classrooms, but also the routine and the safety that schooling provides. Educational disruption would obviously hinder their academic development and their social growth. In the long term, the lack of education creates gaps in skills, in knowledge, in the professional capabilities, which will weaken Gaza's future workforce and economy. But I think more importantly, it's also to exacerbate cycles. It also exacerbates cycles of poverty and trauma. As children grow up without the critical tools that they need to essentially build a better future.
Now, from a humanitarian standpoint, how critical is education for children living in war zones, and what role does it play in their mental, emotional, and social development?
Uh, e- Education is a lifeline for children in war zones. It gives them hope, it gives them structure, it gives them a sense of normalcy amidst the chaos. Schooling supports not only the academic development, but it also supports the emotional and the social well-being. It helps children form social bonds, develop problem-solving skills, and process their trauma. And without education, children in conflict zones face higher risks of mental issues, including depression, including anxiety, and post traumatic stress disorders. So, education gives children a way to envision a future beyond the violence and the destruction that they see around them.
And how do educators, both locally and globally, respond to the trauma and loss that children in conflict zones experience when their schooling is disrupted?
So yeah, I would be referring to the local educators in Gaza, and we see that they show immense resilience, often continuing to carry on their education, and they're teaching intense in destroyed classrooms or even on online platforms despite their limited resources. They not just educators, they also emotional pillars for these children. um, well, globally, educators can support by advocating for the right to education in conflict zones, incorporating trauma-informed teaching and donating educational resources. So if we look at our organization, Educators for Humanity, we are stepping in to raise awareness and provide psychosocial support and push for international action to safeguard education in these regions.
Now, the physical destruction of schools and educational facilities is a major issue. What are some of the broader consequences of this on the future of Gaza's children?
Uh, the destruction of schools is catastrophic,
Mhm.
um, both for immediate access to education and long term development of Gaza's society. I mean, without physical spaces for learning, children are deprived of the environment necessary for structured education. They lose access to knowledge, they lose access to creative outlets and the social connections that come with school. More broadly, the destruction of educational infrastructure cripples the region's future workforce. Without schools, there's a higher risk of illiteracy in these conflict zones. There's lower employment rates, and there's less civic engagement in the future. Also, like I mentioned, the systematic targeting of schools is a clear violation of international law and a gross denial of children's rights, reinforcing the cycle of poverty, reinforcing the cycle of oppression for future generations. And as educators, we can see that the loss of these facilities is a direct attack on Gaza's capability to rebuild itself once this genocide ends.
Mhm. Now let's look at the psychological and emotional impact of this, entire situation. Beyond the loss of education, children in Gaza are dealing with extreme psychological trauma. How can educators and psychologists work together to address the mental health challenges that these children face?
So, educators and psychologists need to collaborate on trauma informed educational approaches that recognize the emotional and psychological burdens that these children carry. Um, I mean, as difficult as it is, schools in Gaza are being transformed into spaces of healing where learning and therapy go hand in hand. Um, with the limited resources that they have, teachers can be trained in basic mental support to recognize signs of trauma and to provide initial emotional care. Partnerships with local and global mental health organizations can ensure that they have that access to professional psychological support, which is, of course, critical for helping children process that grief and trauma.
And what methods or programs could help children in Gaza cope with both the loss of their education and the trauma of living in a conflict zone?
So, trauma-informed programs that combine education with psychosocial support are essentials. Are essential. We have programs like education in emergencies, and they can provide structured learning environments, even in makeshift settings like tents. Um, Also, creative and expressive outlets such as art therapy, such as storytelling, such as sports. These can help children process traumas in ways that our traditional education may not. Technology-driven solutions like online classes and mobile learning apps, even though challenging given Gaza's infrastructure, can also offer some continuity in education.
And yeah, what methods or programs could help children in Gaza cope with both the loss of education and the trauma of living in a conflict zone? I think you dealt with it, but I just need some clarification on that, please.
Marv, can you please repeat that?
What methods or programs could help children in Gaza cope with both the loss of their education and the trauma of living in a conflict zone?
So, like I just mentioned, now
Mhm.
the trauma-informed programs that combine education and psychosocial support are essential. I mentioned education in emergencies, which can provide structured learning environments, even in their makeshift settings like tents. Um, we can use creative and expressive outlets like sports, like storytelling, like therapy. Um, we can even use like technology driven solutions, online classes, and like I mentioned, given the difficulties with Gaza's infrastructure, with the lack of electricity and internet connection, but these mobile apps and online learning platforms can also, to a certain extent, offer some continuity in education.
Now, Tasnim, how important is it for educators worldwide to integrate global citizenship and humanitarian issues into their curricula to help students understand and empathize with children in conflict zones?
It is incredibly important. Um, Integrating global citizenship and humanitarian issues into the curricula allows our students to develop a deeper understanding of the world, and it fosters empathy for those in conflict zones. By teaching our students about the challenges faced by the children in Gaza, educators can help to develop a generation that is more compassionate. We can inspire activism. We can cultivate a generation of young people who are more aware um, of their global responsibilities. But, to add to this, I'd actually like to reflect on something that Mr. Adams said during an interview. He's a principal at a school in Lenasia, and he's the coordinator of the Palestine Solidarity Alliance. And he said something along the lines that educators are a fundamental part of society. We determine the values and the ethics through what we teach and how we teach. It's important that we understand that educators and schools are not a vacuum. We're not islands, and we're not bubbles. We live in a world where we see the inequalities, where we see the poverty, and in this case, we see the hardships of the Palestinian people living under occupation for now 76 years. We see the bombings of entire neighborhoods. We see the bombings of schools and universities, and we have a duty to educate our children and educate ourselves about this current phase of genocide that's happening in Palestine, so that we know that the next generation fully understands the need for a better world, a world that is more just, a world that is more free, a world without Zionism, without apartheid, without racism. And it is our duty as educators. We play a pivotal role in educating the next generation to create a better world.
What are the potential long term impacts on Gaza's future workforce and society if a generation of children grows up without proper education?
If not if Gaza's children are denied education, so the consequences will be felt for decades. A lack of educational professionals, from doctors to engineers to educators. This will severely impact Gaza's ability to rebuild its infrastructure, to rebuild its healthcare system, to rebuild its schools, and its economy. I mean, without education, children are more vulnerable to exploitation, to forced labor, their involvement in the conflict. Gaza society could become even more marginalized, even more isolated, and more impoverished.
Let's look at the role of technology and alternative learning. What kind of innovative educational programs or distant learning options could be implemented in Gaza to help mitigate the effects of war on education?
So, distance learning, of course, where feasible, can provide some sort of continuity. Um, Mobile learning apps, radio-based education, online platforms can supplement traditional schooling, particularly when physical classrooms are unavailable. Collaborations with international institutions to provide access to remote education, like virtual classrooms, can help. Excuse me, but we know that with Gaza's lack of reliable internet and electricity, this obviously poses a significant barrier and makes the need for more innovative, low-tech solutions such as SMS-based lessons, especially with like the heavy reliance on eSIMs currently, or even printed educational materials, and this is all the more critical now.
And from an ethical standpoint, how do you view the denial of education as a form of violence against children in conflict zones?
The the deliberate targeting and destruction of schools is not just a physical act of war. Um, it's a moral crime. Denying children access to education is an act of violation that undermines their dignity, that undermines the humanity and the future potential. Um, Education is a fundamental human right, and its systematic destruction in Gaza, like I mentioned earlier, known as scholasticide, represents a form of cultural genocide aimed at erasing the intellectual future of an entire people. Um, it strips children of the possibility of hope, of progress, of self determination.
Mhm. And what role can international human rights organizations play in safeguarding the right to education in places like Gaza?
Um, Firstly, international human rights organizations must advocate forcefully for the protection of education in conflict zones. And we've seen it happening. So, this includes like pressuring governments to uphold international laws and prohibit the targeting of schools, raising awareness about the scale of scholasticide, and providing direct support to rebuild educational infrastructure. Um, Humanitarian agencies can also collaborate to deliver emergency educational programs, psychosocial support, and resources to the children in Gaza. Ultimately, they play a vital role in holding accountable those reliable for violating children's rights to education.
Just from your, experience and knowledge, are any of these organizations playing any part or doing anything proactive to try and assist these children?
So there has been initially some online platforms, with the collaboration with health workers to tackle both educational challenges and psychological challenges, the trauma. And that was a bit more accessible in the earlier phase of the genocide. But as we know, at the current phase of the genocide, and like I've mentioned, with the with the lack of access to electricity and internet, this makes it increasingly difficult. So this has initially where it was more proactive. Unfortunately, with the circumstances, it's not so much anymore.
Now, for educators that are listening in this evening, what are some practical ways they can get involved in advocating for education in conflict zones?
There's so many, but the starting point is that educators can start raising awareness in their own classrooms, teaching students about the importance of education in conflict zones, and it is in our curriculum. I mean, I teach grade 7 history, and it's just about looking deeper, and it's not just about textbook teaching. And by doing this, we can foster empathy for children living in these conditions. They can also participate in or organize campaigns, donate to organizations that are providing educational aid where they can, and lobby their governments to prioritize education in international aid. But also, global educators can collaborate with the local educators in conflict zones like Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine, of course, and share resources, share expertise, and innovative solutions to keep education alive. Again, I'm going to reiterate the with the lack of electricity and internet, we know how difficult this is.
No, undoubtedly, in fact, the challenges just increase as, once you've got the conflict, then you don't have the electricity, you don't have the internet, and the only solution you have is that, it has to be online teaching, unfortunately, because that's only what is physically possible. So yes, the challenges are there. So we hope that, they can find some solace and they can find some way out of the situation. Now, Tasneem, I want to thank you for joining me on the program this evening and for having shared these thoughts with us. But what message would you like to send to the global education community regarding the situation in Gaza and the right of every child to education?
Our message is simple. Education is not a luxury, it's a right. The children of Gaza deserve the same opportunities to learn, to grow, to thrive as any other child in the world. Um, the global education community has a major responsibility to stand in solidarity with these children, to advocate for their right to education, and to essentially work towards a future where no child is denied this fundamental right, regardless of where they are born or where they live. Um, and it's important that we should never forget that education is the key to breaking the oppression and building a brighter and more peaceful future.
Now, I know I already thanked you for joining me, but there's something that I omitted to ask you. I introduced you as the Secretary General of Educators for Humanity. Tell us a bit about Educators for Humanity. What organization is? What are the aims, objectives, etc.?
So, with the onset of the initial phase of the genocide, many smaller organizations have emerged, and Educators for Humanity was one such organization. It's a group of um, educators from schools in Lenasia, and it has been expanding. And our vision at Educators for Humanity is expansive and it's forward-looking. So we envision a world where education becomes a powerful force, not only for academic growth, but for fostering compassion, unity, and resilience. As educators around the world, we bear the profound responsibility of shaping not just knowledgeable individuals, but compassionate global citizens.
Tasneem, now thank you for joining me on the program this evening. Thank you for sharing those thoughts with us. I mean, it's really touching the subject that we're discussing because, here we have children. I mean, when we have our own children, we realize what efforts we put into their education to assist them, to make sure they've got all the resources, etc. And here we have children who have physically, been demoralized. They've got their infrastructures which have been disrupted. They have psychological trauma that they've experienced, and with all of that, they've got to educate themselves as well. So maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it easy for them, and of course, grants them success and finds a way out for them as well. Tasneem, thank you so much for joining me in the program. We will be talking to you again, and enjoy the weekend. All the best to you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
We spoke to Tasneem Kola, a Secretary General of the Educators for Humanity and an educator at Park Primary School in Indonesia, and she spoke to us about the devastating impact on children in Gaza who are growing up without access to education. This is a huge topic, and I hope that we can find some there can be some sort of light at the end of the tunnel. Now, I must apologize to the listener who had sent me a WhatsApp message in the first part of this program when we were talking about men being abused. And the WhatsApp message said, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Faizal. Excellent topic. Many men are suffering in silence. There are men who are abused financially by their wives who exploit them and ridicule them in front of the children, as well as who then also start disrespecting their father. Some women would constantly degrade their husband and compare him to others, making him feel inadequate as the head of the household. I think this is, very apt, and this is happening very, very often as well. So I want to thank the listeners who have sent us their contributions via WhatsApp. I want to thank you, the listener, for having tuned into Radio Lansar and for listening to Let's Chat. Thank you to Hajra Kota for having produced the show, and of course Zach Umar for having engineered for me this evening, and for the excellent work that Zach's done as well. Zach, thank you very much. I'm going to be back with you tomorrow morning on Rise and Shine, inshallah ta'ala. But the next program that you'll be listening to very shortly is going to be Ikra Wafa, and it's presented by Brother A.K. Muhammad. It is a very spiritually uplifting program. It's a tafsir of the Holy Quran, and very, very informative, very educational. Most important, it is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is being discussed. So let us derive the benefits by listening to this discussion. I'm back with you tomorrow morning. Enjoy the rest of the evening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
All the praise is for Allah, who is the author of all existence and the most generous to his creation, while he is also the all-compelling. Subhanallah, Allah, Allah, Alhamdulillah, Lillah, Lillah. Subhanallah, Allah, Allah, Alhamdulillah, Lillah, Lillah. I will take another bow to you, raise my hands and make dua to you. Thank you for all that you've created. You are the greatest of all time, the most high. I want you to know He's the one who gave you life, who gave you a soul. I'm faded. I want you to know everything you see around you is in control. I'm faded. Subhanallah, Allah, Allah,